have come to you as a shock, just like it came to me. I was sitting in a boardroom in London about 10 months ago, and my client sitting at the other end of a big glass table banged the table and he said, the council said no, no, and no. They said no 3 times. Taps, what can we do about this? I need an answer to this problem quick, and I need it soon. I asked the client to give me 2 weeks to find out what the real issue was and to come up with a solution. So in 2 weeks' time, I managed to find him a comprehensive solution to water neutrality. He took the project to the council, and the council was happy with the proposals. Now, that's what happened over the last 10 months. Water neutrality has been one of those big things that nobody was expecting. It just dropped onto us, and we started dealing with it. In terms of my experience and my history with water neutrality, I've always been involved in water ever since I was at university, more than 25 years ago now. And I've always had a passion for water. I actually did quite a lot of detailed studies for my MSc in water and environmental management regarding the future water requirements of water in the UK and particularly in the world to actually cope with climate change. And it was something that I was really championing, looking at hotels, schools, and other commercial facilities, and even residential homes, how we could actually have much more efficiency within the way that we live our lives and the way that we operate our businesses. So that's taken me on quite a long journey. I used to talk about it, and people used to say, oh, we don't think the industry is there yet, and maybe something's going to happen. The regulation is not there yet, but I'm glad that we're now at that point, and where we're actually building homes, which is great because we need many more homes. Secondly, we are actually safeguarding the environment. But thirdly, more importantly as well, we are actually working with the communities, with the local communities, where we have these water neutrality issues, to find those solutions and to work together to deliver them. I shall just start with a bit of history about myself. I've been working in the development sector in the UK for the last 20 years. Some of the notable projects that I've led on include the Great Western Park Didcot, which was 3,300 units, Ashford Barracks in Kent. I've also worked on far too many regeneration schemes in London, King Square Estate, St. Luke's, Morswell Hill, and so forth. I've had the opportunity to work with both national house builders, housing associations, and a lot of hotel chains and resorts. At the moment, we've just been receiving inquiries, from all over the world. Really, we have been working with the mining conglomerate based in Australia for a project in America. We have had inquiries from Italy about the water solutions that we can bring to the table. And indeed, I think that now's the time for us to really combat this issue and come up with solutions that work for us to deliver in homes and also to keep our environment integrity, safeguarded going forward. I shall just start the presentation now. We will have moments where we can take polls, and in those moments, we'll be able to take 2 or 3 questions, and then we'll have a deep dive panel discussion at the end of the presentation. Now, coming on to what is the main problem with water at the moment, and why have we come to this status that we currently have? In the UK, particularly because of economic vibrancy, we've had an escalation in terms of the population density and also a growing aging population that's also staying alive quite a long time. So it means that our population is increasing. At the same time, it also means that in those areas where we've had an escalation of populations, particularly in the south, where we've had quite a lot of industry and historic towns that were built that are just continuing to grow. We also have quite a number of dormitory towns that were built outside London to cater for the jobs that were available in London over time. And so you find that all of this growth, particularly in the south and now stretching through into the Midlands and so forth, means that the demand of the finite water resources that we have are quite crippling. In addition, we also have other historic factors really affecting the water and the water industry itself. is historically when we started building treatment works and actually servicing developments, all of these assets were owned by councils. They were owned by local councils, and then when we privatized, those assets went into private ownership. There's been something that has been disjointed in the way that the privatization occurred in that when the councils were building, they were building the treatment works to facilitate for the anticipated growth, and they were tracking the population numbers and building for those anticipated growth figures. What we currently have in terms of the integrity of our networks and our systems, we do not have the capacity that we need to cater sufficiently and appropriately for the population that we now have. And hence, we have issues like nutrient neutrality, which has occurred because there's a lot of nutrients that are discharged either from treatment works or really from farmland. But the fact of the matter is, we still have a significant proportion of nutrients that are going into our water bodies that need to be treated. So the treatment works that we have, they cannot sufficiently cater for the entirety of the population. And so we've had situations in the past where there's been reported scenarios of contamination in a number of scenarios, and in those locations we know that certain companies have been fined for discharging polluted effluent into natural streams. I live in Hertfordshire, and as an environmentalist, as an engineer, I love the summers, but I also hate them at the same time, because I do know that our local chalk streams, they tend to dry down. If they're not drying down, they have very low amounts of water, and they actually have algal blooms, and resulting in a lot of fish kills, a lot of pungent smells along the streams that are normally walked. So it's those considerations that if you just take walks around, you actually find that in this scenario where we're actually having a much more dire need for water to be in those streams, we are now having a situation where we are competing with the natural environment for the meager water resources. A significant proportion of the South actually gets their water from local aquifers. Those could be chalk aquifers, and particularly in Horsham, Crawley and Chichester, there is the aquifer that supplies that entire zone that is at risk, and hence which has prompted the water neutrality designation, because it is considered that we do not have sufficient ecological flows to be confident that we can sustain the lives of the natural habitat and the species that are supported by that natural habitat. So, it could be anything from birds, worms, ducks, all of those species, they need sufficient water for them to have their livelihoods, to find food, to actually live in those environments. And there are specific protected species within that wildlife that that are near extinction that need to be taken care of. We also know that a significant proportion of water that's supplied in the South is actually either drawn in from the Midlands, and there are a lot of water transfers that happen. We know that there's a water transfer that comes into Essex. We also know that even in place with Southern Water, it also relies on a significant amount of water transfer within each catchment. So water transfer is a big issue that we are dealing with. But then it also means that as those other areas grow in populations, as they become much more successful, they also place a demand on the water. So we need to look at this differently in terms of the utility of the water that we have and how we can take that forward. So how big is this issue in terms of the big conversation on water? Because water neutrality and nutrient neutrality, they are really intertwined. We do know that earlier in the year, about 120,000 homes are at risk, and owing to nutrient neutrality being spread, is now affecting the Norfolk Broads and that catchment is now seen to be a prime area of consideration. This issue pertaining to water, it means that the whole life cycle of water in itself, if you consider how we use water, we typically consider water to be at the end of the tap, but then water has quite a complete cycle that we need to consider, whether when we're consuming it, what happens to the water after we've consumed it, and how we can actually make much better utilization of that water. So we were all caught off guard, like I was when I met my client last year. And this is one of the big issues that came, from natural England. It was, a lot of people weren't expecting this. Planning applications that have been made all of a sudden were being stopped, and people started lobbying, and other building organizations started looking at pursuing legal action for this to be stayed, or at least to try and get some consideration of, okay, give us a year or 2 or 3 years, give us a warning so that we can be prepared for this. But obviously, that cannot be done when the environment is being undermined. One of the other big things is that the habitat regulations, they actually sit above the planning regulations themselves. So, whilst we have the regime that facilitates planning permission, when it comes to environmental risk and managing the environment, particularly for protected species, the habitat regulations sit above the planning regulations. So you actually see how that plays out as I talk about these big things that are coming to the table, and as we try to tackle the water neutrality issue, what's really happening in the industry in terms of practical issues that we're facing and how we're addressing them. Issue number 1 is, when we're dealing with water neutrality, if we look at the definition of water neutrality itself, water neutrality, it means that whenever you're trying to develop a new site within the affected catchment, you should keep the same water balance. Effectively, your new development should facilitate water being used in the way that it was being used. So if we're drawing from the aquifers 100 cubic meters per day, we should just be drawing 100 cubic meters. There should be not an incremental demand caused by your development. If there is, then you need to offset an existing use by installing water efficient fittings within an existing premises, and then you take those credits to facilitate your developments. That's quite a big issue in terms of how do you consider historic water issues. Initially, when the publication came out from WaterWise, there was a bit of a leeway to consider many more historic uses. I think it was between 10 to 20 years timeline where you could consider the historic water uses. But then what we now have quite a restricted scenario, because we now have a very strict timeline that is now associated with those historic issues. There is a publication on the frequently asked questions by National England that actually stated that you now only have a 3-year time limit to historic issues. Now, that is quite fundamentally concerning, from the simple reason that this 3-year, if you start from today, it encapsulates the 2 years where we've had COVID. So, to be honest, most businesses do not function the way that they ought to be functioning at all. So hence the water consumption would have been disrupted from what it normally is, or what it might be in the future. So it's very difficult to really meet that 3-year timeline and have favorable water consumption rates that you can then use to discount when you're looking at your entire water balance to support your development. I think that's a big issue. We hope that consideration might be looked at in terms of looking at maybe a 5-year timeline, so that at least the normal performance of businesses and the normal performance of water use would be would be considered. The other big issue that we find with this is that it is indeed an additional burden to planning departments, particularly because water neutrality is a complex subject. You're asking planners to then start looking at hydrogeological issues pertaining to water in the ground. You're asking them to start considering calculating things like PUG, water efficiency calculator, what water fittings would work, grey water recycling, or rainwater harvesting. All of those issues, they actually compound this issue and then really make it quite tenuous in terms of trying to get to a solution, because at one hand, as a consultant, you are designing a system that in technical terms work, but then you then need to really handhold the planning department to take them along with you and the other consultants team, so that they understand what you're trying to deliver. And as this issue of water neutrality is less than a year old, it means that many of the things that we're bringing to the table, they're untried or not yet trusted within the industry. So they need live demonstration or pilot projects for them to be given the thumbs up, and then for them to be supported by the requisite planning departments. We have looked at the implication of all of these water issues, and particularly considering how bad might this situation get going forward. One of the major issues that you need to consider is that water neutrality as a principle has not been considered by the Environment Agency or Natural England just last year. It's something that was being studied by the Environment Agency as far back as 2008. And in studies that they were carrying out, they were trying to look at the funding mechanism, how developers could actually fund this. The other big thing that's associated with this, as you will appreciate, that development typically accounts for 1 to 3% of the housing stock that we currently have on an annual basis. So if you consider the demand that we have on water and consider that only 1 to 2% or 3% difference would actually change the dynamics of the entire water environment, that's quite challenging. This water neutrality, it actually needs a much broader consideration in terms of delivering it in catchments, and we particularly think that's the best way forward. It's great that we can actually look at water offsetting within the existing communities, but then we do consider that significantly much more effort needs to be made outside the confines of facilitating development, but then just making sure that communities are reducing their water use, and particularly in the south, where we know that there is quite a high high use of water per individual. Having looked at and projected the figures, we anticipate that by 2040, nearly 1 million homes could be affected by these water issues, and would definitely need a solution. At the moment, we are delivering about 200,000 homes throughout the country. If this regulation is actually applied to the rest of the South, then we anticipate that there would be a significant escalation. I'm just going to ask my team to issue the first poll so that you can be more engaged within this conversation, and we'll see what comes out from that. So the first poll reads, do you think that a government-led water neutrality resolution will be found in the next 6 months, 12 months, 24 months, or you don't know? I'm just wondering what could be your thoughts? How soon could we have a statutory resolution to this scenario? Okay, we've had responses from about 45% of you. So if we would get a couple more responses so that we can go to the next section. Okay, fantastic. So, some interesting results coming out of this poll. More than 90% have participated, and quite a significant number, about 60%, assumes that the government will come up with a solution within the next 12 months. From our experience, we do think that's quite optimistic, particularly if you look at other water scenarios and how how long it's taken to deal with things like stored marsh and the nutrient neutrality. So we think that it's going to take longer than the 12 months. But it's great to see what your thoughts are. I'll ask the team to just share the results with you so that you can see the polling results as we move into the next section. The next items that are really of consideration is how do you deliver the water offsetting solutions, particularly given that, one, it was a shock. Many of the planning applications that have been made were already in the system. So in terms of a viability point of view, these considerations would not have been made. One of the other big things that you really need to consider is if you're looking at water offsetting strategy, then beyond just the technical viability is actually how do you deliver it on the site itself. And these things, whether it's rainwater harvesting you're going for, boreholes, water efficiency schemes, greywater recycling, these items mean that it actually takes time to install on the water offsetting scheme. And so, to actually go to the council and make a submission, say, okay, we have a water offsetting scheme that we've actually delivered, and we've got so many credits that we now want to make the planning application. That takes time in itself. So, there are viability considerations, one in terms of the costs, and which will affect the housing spec as well, to affect the layout. It will also affect your master plan, just trying to incorporate some of these. In some instances, it does affect the internal arrangements of rooms. If you've got internal greywater recycling systems, rainwater harvesting, that can also affect your plumbing network. So it's the sensitivity of all of these things, how all of these items really come to the table and really affect what has been designed by the team. And we do consider that water neutrality as a subject needs to be considered right from the beginning, right at master planning stage, so that you can capture the water assets, the things that will actually help you to deliver a much better and viable water neutral site. We actually find that it's actually easier to deliver a water neutral site when you've got a bigger site than a smaller one, for the simple reason that with larger sites, there are more options that you can bring to the table. For instance, you could incorporate boreholes, especially if you can demonstrate that the borehole does not affect the one that is being used by Southern Water at Haddam, which is quite important. But how we actually use boreholes on the sites that we work on, we consider the fact that we are drawing water from the borehole. So what we do, we design an aquifer recharge scheme that at one section of the site is actually drawing water from the borehole. At the other section of the site, we're actually discharging back into the aquifer clean water. And how do we facilitate that? We make sure that we have a reed bed and a treatment system before the water is actually discharged back into the borehole. Our greywater recycling system recycles water to drinking water standards, to old WHO standards. So that's fairly, it's one of the best on the market for actually giving that level of treatment to water. So we always have an excess of greywater in our developments, because typically in a household you can use up between 35 to 40% of greywater for toilet flushing and the washing machine. But because the opportunity to harvest greywater is much greater than what can be used in a household, you typically have 20% more of greywater that's available to you. So that greywater is already clean to drinking water standards. We capture it and we discharge it back into the aquifer. On smaller schemes, we capture that and it can be used for landscaping, for instance, and communal washing machines and so forth. We also know that in terms of the sensitivity of viability of some of these items, particularly if you look at rainwater harvesting, it's quite sensitive to weather patterns. So sometimes being overly reliant on it as a system, like now, for instance, where we're having significant water issues, particularly with the drought that we now have in some areas, experiencing only 4% of the annual rainfall that they ought to have been experiencing, means that it's very, very, very difficult then to justify a rainwater harvesting strategy. However, in terms of a risk management protocol that we have adopted, and that has been taken on board as well by some of the councils, requiring that you allow for at least 36 drought days. Typically, BS 8110, which is the rainwater harvesting standard, it allows for 18 days of storage based on historic rainfall profiles, which means that every 18 days we would expect to get water and then to be able to recharge whatever storage facility we might be having. Horsham has adopted the principle of at least doubling that to 35 or 36 days. In some instances, we've gone, particularly where we're doing bore aquifer recharge, we actually look at up to 90 days, because that gives us the capacity within a 3-month window to actually be able to capture that rainwater. And particularly, that technique actually works well on larger schemes because you could incorporate it within the SADS facilities and so forth. So you find that with the larger schemes, and one of the big things, if you've got 50 units or 100 units or 200 units where you've got multiple developers, in this instance where you're dealing with water neutrality and infrastructure, it's actually much more advantageous for the developers to come together and have a holistic system that addresses all the issues for everybody. Because if they work conjointly, it means that you actually have a much more viable solution that works for everybody who's at the table. Moving on to the other issue that we've had to contend with is historic consents. When we are delivering water offsetting schemes, one of the big things that comes to question is what is the current water use? Yes, we can get that from the water bill or the water meter. But the major issue that you then have is what the historic consents meant. So, for instance, if somebody had been living in a house that's code for sustainable homes or BREEAM very good or excellent commercial building, the councils do not consider the current water use to be necessarily the one that's actually prevailing. They consider the standard to which the house was built or the development was built. So it's it's something that's a bit tortuous, as would expect, because if you find these existing properties where they're consuming quite large amounts of water, you then consider, I actually think that I've got a very big opportunity to use to reduce this water and make this site much more efficient. And so maybe your target for residential use was 110 liters per person per day, and by making changes you can bring it to 90, 80, but they're actually using water up to 140, 135 liters per person per day, which is the typical standard use in the south per capita. So you'll find that that disparity really affects how your scheme is considered going forward. The other challenge that comes to the table as well is the inconsistency between the councils themselves. For instance, Horsham has adopted 85 litres per person per day. This is following on from a report that was written for them by their consultants. The report actually covers all three councils that are affected: Horsham, Crawley and Chichester. In Crawley, was still looking at schemes where we're at 100 litres per person per day, and in Chichester we actually have a site that's considered 90 litres per person per day. Where do I think everything will land? I think everything is going to land at least 85 litres per person per day. If your site is going to planning now and you think that you might be stuck in planning for the next 1 to 2 years, just go for 85 litres per person per day, because it will catch you out if you don't do that. The major issue with going for 85 litres per person per day is that when you start hitting those figures, you can't really do it without greywater recycling or rainwater harvesting. So it's a big consideration, because if you try and just do it based on the water fittings themselves, it means that everything is a trickle, and human nature is that when people move in, they will tend to change all of those fittings, because they just don't work. When you start having taps that are 3 liters per minute and showers that are 5 liters per minute and baths that are 80 liters. Those things, if you just try and drive it just based on the component, it means that the comfort level of the unit itself it significantly drops. And also you can have significant issues in terms of operation. For instance, if you consider retirement homes, care homes, and even hotels, for instance, those areas where there's a lot of high traffic of people, but then there's also a sensitivity to health. If you put a 4x2 dual flush toilet, you're most likely going to have recurrent situations of flooding and blockages. So you are better off going for a 6-3 toilet, dual flush, or 6-4. But then the implication is that because you're giving people a bit more water for comfort, you then need to augment that for you to hit that 85 liters per person target. These issues pertaining to water, just looking at it from a market point of view, is it an opportunity, or are these just issues that are insurmountable that will just cause bottlenecks? We think that in terms of the water agenda, it needs a lot of people that change their mindset about it. That really champion the cause of water. I was just reading a poll that was done by Thames Water, and it indicated that quite a lot of people in the south actually consider that they would look at rationing their water use if it meant that we avoided droughts in the future. So it's something that we have to really consider, and it's water is no longer about just having the water at the end of the tap for all of us. It means that we need to consider the entire cycle of the water journey, when it gets into the ground, when we extract it from the aquifers, when we use it, where does it go, how much treatment can we actually facilitate before it goes back into the rivers. And so you look at those opportunities about how can you actually affect what's happening with that water cycle journey, and particularly on that point, we are quite strong about really looking at how can we facilitate treatment on site before it leaves, because particularly when you're dealing with water neutrality, developers have got two options. It's either you reduce your water consumption slightly, and then the fact that you're sticking at 100 liters per person per day on your site that you're developing means that if it's a greenfield site, it just means that you need to offset a lot more within the local community. And we're saying that if you think of it the other way around, that budget that you want to offset off-site, if you use it on your site to install things like the Hydroloop domestic greywater recycling system, it means that you're recycling 60% of the water that's coming to your site, and that changes, in how environmentally sustainable your site is as a whole. It also means that for those bigger, larger infrastructure sites that are at the edge of towns, or that are just on the boundary of cities, where you're going to have to upgrade the pipe to supply your water to come there. You're going to upgrade the sewer to send all of the water back to the sewer treatment works. If you're recycling 60% of it, it means that consequently you might not necessarily have to significantly update that entire pipeline all the way to the sewer treatment works, and vice versa for the fowl that's leaving the site. So potentially, if it was a big 1,000 unit site and you needed a 300 millimeter pipe to discharge it back to the sewer treatment works, you might end up with 150, because 60% of the water is being recycled on the site. You have this closed loop, which is helping you to take the water further, because the water that's always going to come from the washing machine is always going to be recycled. The water that's coming from the shower is always going to be recycled. The water that's coming from the taps is always going to be recycled. The water that's only leaving the site is the water that's coming from the toilet. So that's quite a big result if you look at it in that context. Secondly, if we also look at it based on the fact that just to try and de-risk your future developments, You need to consider this as a tool to actually enhance your development. We're actually looking at significant development within the south. There's a project that we're looking at just last year for an institutional fund that we moved from 3,300 to more than 5,000 units. And what we managed to do with that site is effectively do this where 60% of the grey water is being recycled on site, which means that significant costs associated with really upgrading the treatment works, all of the pump stations that needs to draw the water in and then take it out. You actually have your own asset that's on site that can be recycled over and over again. Every shower water is recycled, every bath water is recycled, every washing machine water, all of that water is an asset. And so if you recycle it, you can use it more. And particularly where we're having scenarios where we now have more sensitive development that needs more water to create the lush and the experience, particularly with retirement villages. And also we know that in the suburbs, a lot is now being done because we are now going to be spending most of our time at home or working from home, which means that the entire environment that we're living in needs to have those attributes where you've got a water supply. And the grey water actually facilitates you getting about 20% of water that you would have flushed down the toilet to go to the sewer treatment works. You can then use it to supply an allotment, or you can use it to water the landscape, or you can use it in a swimming pool on your site or development. So it's looking at it in that context that water is actually an asset if you consider it in that context, and also just reacting to the reality that particularly where we are in the south and southeast, we are already in a high water stressed area. We are overmining these aquifers to the tune of 700 million liters per day. The Environment Agency has got a target to start reducing that by early as 2025, which is just 3 years away. So in 3 years' time, we anticipate that there's definitely going to be a lot more regulation, particularly around water neutrality. And having said that, we do know that the Environment Agency and Ofwat and Affinity Water, there's a project that's actually been assigned to consider looking at how do we actually deliver water neutral developments. And they're looking at a case study of 3,000 units. Some of the aspects that they're going to be implementing on the pilot study, we're actually doing them at the moment. We're leading. So we are much more further ahead than what the case study and pilot that's being sponsored by Ofwat is doing. But we are happy that the government is coming along, and we are part of that journey where we're leading with innovation, we're leading with technology, and we're delivering these solutions so that we get better performance of the invaluable asset that we have, which is water. It also helps the environment itself. And in the broader context, we are actually doing a schools competition. We'll be running it every year for the foreseeable future, because we think that the conversation of water, it needs to be ingrained and it needs to be embedded, and we need to have a cultural shift in terms of how we relate to water, and that is no longer just a matter of opening the tap. There are consequences around how much we open that tap and how we use that water and how we treat it. So we think that it's something fundamental for us to take forward. But those are some of the initiatives that we're bringing to the table. The other great thing is that we're also working on a water neutrality strategy, because, as I said before, our grey water recycling system makes sure that 60% of the water that you actually use remains on site. So looking at it in the context of nutrient neutrality, is the nutrients that leave the site. So if you've got 100 liters leaving the site, and we can reduce that to 40 liters leaving the site, it means that we've already made a significant impact on the nutrient neutrality case, which means that the number of nutrients that are leaving the site, they are not that significant as you would have. So we have got an exciting launch that we're going to have in the last quarter of this year, where we're going to bring our nutrient neutrality suite of solutions to the market. We're working on a couple of pilot case studies in the background, and we'll be happy to share that information within the newsletter within the next coming months, and most probably we're going to have another one of these webinars to talk about that conversation. I think now it's time for the second poll. I'll ask the team to share the next poll, please. Okay, fantastic. So we've had about 60% returns, and overwhelming result is that there is support to actually roll out water neutrality to these water stressed areas in the south of England, and we're really patriotic about that sentiment, and that's why we have decided to really invest in the younger generation and actually to see how we can motivate them, how we can have an embedded discussion about water, so that as they go through university schools and all the way from the primary schools, they are conscious to what happens with water, the entire journey of water, and why it's important to actually harness that vital resource. Now, going back into some of the big issues that you need to consider, particularly when it comes to the fact of consents. When you're delivering a water offsetting strategy, one of the big things is ownership of property where you're actually going to offset. Particularly if you have multiple parties that are involved, it's very challenging, if I may say, to get the cooperation of everybody to sign up to go into the Section 106 agreement that they're happy for their asset to be conditioned in perpetuity, because effectively that is what it means. If you're offsetting a property or commercial building, it means that that site, for the entirety that we have the water neutrality designation, it cannot use more water than what the water offsetting strategy is. So, for instance, if we had a house that was using 700 liters per day over the 4 or 5 people living there, if we do water efficiency fittings, make sure that we reduce that by at least 20%, it means that in perpetuity, they're only going to be using 560 liters per day. The implication of that is if there's a change of tenure or change of use. So, for instance, if you've got a 4-bedroom house and then all of a sudden you decide, we will now want to move out, we want to make this an HMO, 7 bedrooms HMO, we're going to convert the lounge and this and so forth. We're going to have many more bedrooms and put more en-suites in here. The implication is that you need to then maintain that 560. And I think that's a broad conversation, and that's why the conversation has to be on a catchment basis. It needs to be broader. It needs to be supported from all elements for people to understand that in perpetuity we are not going to exceed this quantum. And this is one of the reasons why we've actually set up the Water Bank. The Water Bank is a database which is set up on a GIS system where on the schemes that we're working, we actually evaluate the water. We carry out water audit of water offsetting sites that we're offsetting initially to establish their current water use and then the targeted performance that we're going for. Get the works done, make sure that we're hitting that target. And then in perpetuity, we monitor that site so that every year, mostly these sites, commercial ones particularly, they have automatic meter reads and they send us their data every year and we populate that database so that the council at any time they can come and say, okay, this was your water offsetting site for this planning consent. How is it performing now? Do we need to retrofit? Because the issue of water neutrality it's a legacy issue. It's not it's not an incidental issue like what we had with the Code for Sustainable Homes, where you've got the standard that is met by the components, but then that is never measured over time. There is a requirement now that we're seeing, which is quite stringent from the councils, that they want certainty, and there will be a performance required over time for you to actually demonstrate that the site that you've offset is actually meeting that performance standard. The major issue that you find is how do you collate this data, and how do you make it sufficiently secure? So what we've done as part of the GIS system on the water bank, we have the planning consent that's associated with that site, its water neutrality strategy, whether it's grey water recycling, boreholes, rainwater harvesting, which is well documented and identified, and then it's linked to the water offsetting site if there's a water offsetting need. And we think that that's the best and most robust way of doing it. And the councils obviously will have a link to then get into the database and actually test and make sure that the assigned offsets are kept within the assigned permitted properties. So it's a very robust system that we have. We're launching it into the wider market in September, towards the end of September. And so what developers can actually do going forward is to have a service where they will have 5 or 6 or 7 developments. Say, okay, we've got planning consents here. We need to monitoring this site. Can you help us capture the data? Can you follow up? Can you report at these periods to the councils? Just in the same way where we have got transport planning, matters are dealt with where there is, a period of assessment that's embedded within the planning requirement. That's what is going to be happening with water offsetting credits going forward to ensure that that reduction in water consumption is actually captured and followed through. One of the biggest things that you really need to be aware of is that water neutrality performance cannot be conditioned. Currently, it cannot be conditioned. That might change in the future, but currently it cannot be conditioned. There are some pilot schemes that we're looking at where performance parameters of technology and aspects that we're looking at household levels, where we've, there are samples that we're looking at in terms of if we put this fitting for so many units, what on average was the performance reduction in terms of water use. We do consider that such schemes in the future, they will have an opportunity to be adopted in some form, but it's a matter of conversations, and we're embedded in those initial pilot projects where we're testing the parameters of the technology, which is demonstrating a performance in terms of water reduction, and then we say if we roll this out over 100 units or 200 units, this is the performance target that we expect. If that is then adopted by the councils, because this data will be fed to Ocean Crawley and Chichester. Once we're hoping by the end of the year we might have resolution on that. So it's something that we're working in the background on to try and see if we can have some of those initiatives, bring those to the table and see how we can take them forward to have adopted strategies that can be consented without needing the implementation first. So at the moment, if you don't implement your water offsetting credit and actually physically have your water offsetting credits, you cannot get the planning consent. Which is the other advantage of the water bank, because we're identifying properties, private homes and also commercial buildings, schools and gyms and so forth, where we are retrofitting and setting up the bank of water credits where developers can then come and actually acquire those credits, but they are particularly assigned to a particular property. So if we say these couple of units, they have to go and be assigned to that development, then that is what we do. There's a big constraint associated with this, and obviously the reality of paying for significant costs before you get planning, because traditionally we have always paid for planning items and planning conditions after we've actually got the planning consent, and particularly this is quite tortuous for SME developers, for instance, because funding is associated with the release of the planning consent, and for you to then find a separate pot of money where you can go and do the water offsetting credits is a bit difficult. So that's why we're really, working and really championing the idea of the water bank. Say, okay, if we if we lead and do this and secure these credits first, then the developers can come and utilize the credits that are within the bank. We find that element of cooperation and engaging and being transparent about how we are going about it is very important, and that is what will give credence to the whole exercise. But yeah, that's that issue about the conditionality of the water neutrality condition is quite tortuous, especially because it's costly to do and it takes time to actually deliver it, and we think that's why the Water Bank comes into its own in terms of helping push that agenda forward. Now, on this slide, I'm just going to talk about some of the major things that we found, particularly with what has come out from in legal discussions and things that have actually come out of the courts regarding where people have gone and said, okay, we are going to take you to court because we don't think that these are, these conditions are fair, or the way that water neutrality is being applied is fair. So these are tests that we then put on each and every one of our sites. Your water neutrality strategy has to be robust. It has to be beyond scientific doubt. It must be viable and technically feasible. And it must also be viable in perpetuity. These things are sensitive, and these are the 5 fundamental tests that we've seen occur time and time again when judgments are being made, when people have taken their sites to appeal, and we're actually helping a number of clients at appeal at the moment with quite large significant schemes and demonstrating how we're meeting all of these attributes that are being discussed out there. We think that one of the big things as well is the management protocols. How do you manage your water offsetting strategy, which is outside of your site, the confines of the site? That one is a big one. And hence that falls quite well into the Water Bank as well, because the Water Bank actively manages your water offsetting credits, and then it monitors them, and then it reports them. So that management protocol is something that's quite sensitive. It needs to be clear, it needs to be defined, it needs to be assigned, just like what you have with the other management protocols in developments, where you've got, whether it's landscaping or it's SADs, in perpetuity, who's going to be managing those things, and who's going to be responsible for them. Some of the initiatives, that look at, beyond scientific doubt, is that if you're introducing a technology, it must be a proven technology. It must be a technology that people can actually rely on, and that they can actually take forward to deliver on site. At the moment, we anticipate that as water neutrality becomes a broader issue and it's being implemented more and more and becomes ingrained in schemes in the South, we anticipate that the cost of actually delivering water neutrality solutions to sites will actually come down over time. Our experience is that typically it costs you about $7,500 to deliver a water neutrality site. And that's particularly based on approximately $5,000 on your site and $2,500 off site per unit. That's what we are finding. We do appreciate that there are reports that have been done by others, for instance, Waterwise and so forth, that talk of lesser figures, but then those figures do not, they're static figures in the fact that they're just saying for you to retrofit, you need 5 homes and it's going to cost this for the elements, but then that does not allow for the management that, and organizing it, and the team and all the other legal frameworks that need to go into it in terms of getting the other, the team on board, the landowners on board to actually facilitate this. So there are those nuances that need to be considered in the cost, and that you need to be aware of. These are just some of the clients that we work with. We actually have a scheme that we're working on for Crawley Borough Council, a substantial group. We also have schemes that we work on for Inspired Villages, Bellway. We have other clients like Prime Homes that we're working for, many others, SME developers and household names that are not here. But what we actually find is that in some of the schemes that we're working in the south of England, particularly, we're actually discussing this at high level for the larger strategic sites and saying, okay, for us to develop the most sustainable and vibrant community, if we recycle most of our water on the site, it means that you're actually going to have a much more vibrant community because you're going to have greener lawns, you're going to have your water features are always going to be a lush in terms of having a fresh water source that you have. They're not going to be dwindling down in terms of the water that's there. They're always going to be full, and as you know, as those water ponds and water features, when the water dwindles, the turbidity increases, and so they start being murky. You take all of that, and fresh water is actually good for always keeping high oxygen levels within the water source. Then you take away the incidents that you might have with things like algal blooms and pungent smells coming from water. So those are some of the considerations why adopting a very strong water neutral stance in terms of policy or a strategic level is quite important going forward, and something that should be encapsulated. And we found that in the south, we've got a site in Buckinghamshire where we're doing this. We've got sites in Hertfordshire where we're doing it, and we've got sites in Essex as well. We're not necessarily needing to offset because the designation hasn't been there, but the principles, we're applying them on the site so that those developments, they are future-proofed for delivering the houses, and it just gives them a better environmental status than everybody else who's just stopping at net zero carbon or plus homes. So if it's also pro water neutral, then that's another big element that will make these developments much more vibrant. I think we're now going to the last poll. Yeah, I'm rather curious with this one to find out how many of units are really affected on your own developments. Fantastic. Okay, so typically most of you have 1 to 500 units that are affected by water neutrality, and those are quite interesting quantities. Particularly, we do know that they are mostly associated with bigger SMEs and national house builders, and particularly they actually offer quite a big opportunity to actually deliver water neutral, particularly if it's a land-based scheme. But we're also delivering quite a lot in town centres, in places like Crawley, water neutral developments, and really working with what we can deliver on those assets themselves, particularly on brownfield sites. So yeah, we'll be glad to be of assistance on those sites. All right, thank you very much. I think quite a number of you have been raising a number of questions. If we may now go to the panel discussion where we can table some of those questions, that would be great. Okay,
I'm just promoting a few people that are left in this, so if anyone would like to join in or has any questions for Tapio, then obviously please feel free to do so.
I think if you've got a question, you can raise your hand and then we can refer to you and address the question.
So I think we've got Lorna there. Lorna, hello. If you'd like to ask any questions, I don't think we can hear you.
If you're struggling with the mic, maybe you could type the question. I don't think we have any questions at the moment. I hope I've been as thorough and as comprehensive. Hopefully that's what this shows. That you've had quite a lot of content and information to consume there. But if you've got any other burning questions, or ask the team after this, we'll send you a replay of this webinar, and you can always contact us for help or just for early inquiries on any of your developments, and we can see how we can work together to deliver water neutral developments, and particularly as it really does affect the natural environment, and taking communities along is quite is quite important. And you can imagine a public consultation where you actually go in, particularly in areas that are not water neutral. You can actually start saying, well, we are pursuing a water neutral strategy on the site itself, whilst we're not doing it within the community, but we're trying to be as water efficient as possible. That's quite a big issue, particularly in places like Cambridge, Oxfordshire, Hertfordshire, where the water supply comes from chalk streams, and people are very conscious of the fact that water dwindles during the summer, like now. And so I think those are some of the strategic conversations that people could actually have and consider going forward in terms of water neutrality. I think Lorna said something, but I think your mic is muted on Zoom. It's not. Stelios, can you help Lorna? She's speaking, but on her side it's not muted.
Yeah, no, everything is unmuted. It should work. There's no reason why you shouldn't be able to hear you. Did you want to type your question?
Okay. Regarding the water bank, is it your intention that it will include credits created by other rainwater reuse solutions or purely for hydroloop savings? The hydroloop is part of the solution, but we're also using rainwater harvesting techniques as well as a solution, because on some estates or even schools or hotels, rainwater harvesting lends itself well to being part of the solution. And so you find that rainwater harvesting as a technique, it is actually helpful. And in some instances, we've just gone with the rainwater harvesting instead of the hydroloop. So it's part and parcel of the offer that we can have in terms of the water bank, of course. Yeah, I think opening it up to solutions provided by competitors, I think we need to see the context of that. I think in my mind, I think it's more viable to have a more vibrant mechanism of doing it as a platform, because we think there's merit to make more traction to help the environment and to get houses built than having a closed shop. So in terms of that, it's something that we can look at, and we can work in partnership, of course. Yeah, of course. We are quite sensitive about the protocols upon which the water bank operates. For instance, a developer that is not targeting 85 liters per person per day cannot necessarily use the water bank, because we are asking people, communities and schools and so forth, to reduce their water demand. If all the developer is going to do is to pay for the right of the credits, then that defeats the moral campus or policy of having actually a community-based approach. So we want everybody to be pushing it and having a singular platform that is managed, that is holistic, is better, because then there's more visibility in terms of that side was done by that company, but we know the credits. It can be managed throughout. We don't consider if you have a proliferation, you are duplicating, and over time, some things will peter out. Some of the greatest products will stay, but we consider what we're offering to be an entirely one-stop shop, all the way from designing the scheme, because we come from an infrastructure environment-led analysis. We look at sites before you even decide to buy them, and we can tell you what the hydrological assets are on that site, and what you can actually do with that site, where you can have your SUD system, where you can have the opportunities for boreholes. We can look at it before you even purchase, and so for us, seeing that journey through. And really maximizing that water efficiency, it's part of the legacy that we want to create. Okay, I think those are all of the questions. Thank you very much for meeting me, everybody, and we'll have a series of these. Have a great day. See you on the next one. Bye.